Hi class, this is Anna Timmerman from the LSU AgCenter, and it's hard to believe we're already 25% of the way through this class. We hope you're enjoying it. We've been having a lot of fun putting it together, and we just want to take the time to let you know we have over 30,000 students now, which is amazing. So if a link is broken or the website seems like it's down, just give it a few minutes, hit refresh, and try it again. You may have to wait till the following morning because we're fixing things as we go. So it's been a really interesting learning curve, and as much as I'd love to answer all the emails, we're getting a few hundred emails every hour sometimes. So do try to post to the discussion board. That's that Facebook link that's at the end of each module. And chances are somebody's asked your same exact question and that there is an answer there waiting for you. Really try to rely on one another as students. Try to do some good resource research. We send a lot of good things your way each week with each module. So if you have questions, check out those resources or try Googling LSU AgCenter and then the question that you have. And chances are pretty good we have an article or something posted already that may address that question.
So class, this week's module, we're going to talk about plant propagation. And we're going to focus on seeds in this one. But before we start that module, there's one thing that we forgot to mention at the beginning of the class, which is a good idea, is to have a gardening notebook or a gardening journal with, Anna's showing you hers right there, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. It is a good idea to have something that's bound so that the pages don't fall out and they stay more or less in a chronological order. And in that gardening journal, you want to put copies of your soil tests or transcribe them into it. When you took the test, all the information from your soil tests, if you use any amendments or fertilizers, what you used, how much you used, when you used it. And then when you get to the plants, the plant varieties, you want to put in.
That's what I've got here.
Oh, that's great. Because you want to put what you put in, what you planted. If you grow 10 different varieties of pepper, okay, I actually grow about 50 or 60.
I know you do. You've got a ton of them.
Even if you all grow only 5, you want to write that in and then keep notes throughout the season. Maybe how much they bear, maybe which ones do better in the conditions you're growing them in, which ones you like better.
Yes.
How they taste. And then the following seasons, you don't have to rely on your memory. You'll have it all written down. The varieties you used, when you planted them, how you like them. Even record in there when you start your seedlings, when those are planted, and when you set them out. Because even amongst varieties of peppers, some seeds will germinate faster than others. So if you have 2 different varieties of pepper and one of them germinates in 1 week and the other one takes 3 weeks, well, then the next year, if you want to grow those 2 same varieties, you'll know that, okay, I start this quick germinating variety 6 weeks or so before I want to transplant it. And the other one, you want to back it up to 8 weeks because you know it's going to take it 2 weeks to germinate.
A little extra time.
And so that is really important information. And there's a couple other things you could probably include in there too, right?
For me, what I like keeping track of is not only what I have planted, but what I would like to plant. Because I'm always reading and looking at new things, and I will not remember them 6 months from now when I'm ordering seeds. So I like to write down a wish list in my garden journal, and I'm running out of room at my house, but it never hurts to have that list to fall back on. Yeah, it's a good resource and a good thing to get in the habit to start writing this stuff down.
And another good thing is to as you're going out walking through your garden, is to note any insects or diseases that show up. Because generally the weather is pretty consistent from year to year, and it's the weather that controls a lot of when diseases and insects show up. So if you see armyworms the first week of April in this year, then the first week of April next year, you know to start looking for them, and maybe you'll get a little control on them sooner and they won't do as much damage. So noting when you see the diseases, when you see the insects, and if you have any unusual weather conditions at any part during the growing season. If you make a note of that and something then funky happens later in the year, you'll note that, okay, I did have some unusual weather. Maybe what's happening is due to that bad weather we had.
Exactly.
And then if it doesn't repeat the next year, you probably won't have the same problem. So you know not to worry about it.
Yeah, I also like writing down, in terms of like vegetables, which ones I actually like to eat. And I grew some tomatoes before this year for the first time that I really just don't like. So I actually have notes in here saying never plant that again. So it's good to keep track.
Yeah, those are really good. And I like growing unusual things too. And so, okay, everyone loves this except me, I'm sure. Arugula. But that same kind of note. Hey, I want to grow arugula. How does it do? Well, I tell you, it does great in our area. It produces massive amounts of arugula. Yep. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a weed. Sorry, I don't like arugula. But that's something I can put in my notebook that says, okay, it grows well. If anyone asks, this is how you do it. If anyone wants to give you any, tell them, no, no, no.
All right, fair enough. I love arugula. So. Great.
So now let's move into this week's class. And we're going to talk about plant propagation, this class and the next class. And there are basically two different ways that plants propagate. They propagate sexually, and that's by seeds.
We have a lot of seeds here.
And plants can be propagated asexually, sometimes termed vegetative propagation.
Yep, and we're going to cover that in the next module. So this one is going to be focused primarily on sexual reproduction and seeds and seed saving. So like we covered last week in the botany lab, flowers are made up of sexual parts. They have male and female parts within them, either in the same flower, which again is a perfect flower, as Dr. Paula said, or in a separate flower system where there's a male flower and a female flower, kind of like your squash blossoms, which is an imperfect flower system. The pollen is the male. It's moved from the anther to the stigma, which is the female, and the transfer of pollen can take place with the wind, by insects like honeybees and beetles, by animals even, or by self-pollination.
Now, once the pollen lands on the sticky part of the stigma, and the pollen tube will start to grow. And once the pollen tube grows and forms and goes down to the ovule, the sperm cell moves down the pollen tube into the ovule, which is the egg, which is in the ovary. Those join, and then the act of fertilization is complete. And once fertilization happens, the plant seed begins to develop. Essentially, it's set seed is a common term gardeners use. And the seed contains genes from both the male and the female flower. So if they're on the same plant, then the genes are going to be pretty close to the same. If it comes from different plants, then there could be a lot of diversity in the genes that are brought into that plant and those seeds that form. And so sexual reproduction is the means by which genetic diversity occurs in the plant system.
Sexual reproduction also allows for crossbreeding and sharing of different genetic material. So plant breeders can actually select parents with traits that are desirable, make a cross, and save the seed from that cross. Sexual reproduction also allows for greater diversity. As Dr. Joe said, it allows for mutations. Think of it as a roll of the dice. You don't know quite what combination of traits you're going to end up with. A lot of garden plants that we have in our yards will create seed that is easy to save and collect. So if you're used to spending hundreds of dollars on seeds every spring, this is a really good thing to get into and can save you some money. Plus, seed saving is fun.
Yeah. Now we're going to quickly, go over this slide that you see in front of you now. The sexual reproduction in plants. Just to remind us from the botany class we have the stigma and the style and the ovary. That's all part of the female reproductive system. And then we have the stamen, which is the anther, and the filament. It makes up the stamen, and that's the male reproductive part. So the stamen is the male, the pistil is the female part. And that's what the flower looks like. Now, this is something that we haven't gone over yet in botany, but since we're talking about seeds, then we want to know something about the anatomy of the seed and what takes place during germination.
Yeah, it's going to be different for monocots and dicots. This is a really good example on the slide. You can see where the monocots, like this corn plant, they germinate in a different way than the dicots do. And I think this is just a really good visual representation of what that looks like.
Yeah, and you can see in the seed we've got the parts labeled. Both dicots and monocots have very similar parts. So the embryo is in there.
Yep.
The seed coat, keep note of where that is, and that will become really important later on when we're talking about germination.
Absolutely.
And some of the things that are important in germination. So the seed coat, it can be very soft and fleshy, easily penetrated, or the seed coat can be something that's very, very hard and hard to penetrate. And that all has a big effect on germination. And then you have the little embryo in there, and parts of the embryo, we have the epicotyl, the hypocotyl, and the radicle. Essentially, the radicle is the little root part.
Yep.
As it grows out, it's going to develop into the root system. The epicotyl, that's the top ground part. That's going to develop into the stem and the leaves, eventually the flowers, all the buds, everything. That comes from the epicotyl. Now, the hypocotyl is a funky little part because what it does is once the radicle forms and starts to produce roots, the hypocotyl will push the developing embryo or germinating plant up through the soil. So the hypocotyl is the part between the radicle and the epicotyl, and it eventually becomes part of the stem.
Yep.
But if you're growing plants and they germinate, the first thing that you see pop out that looks like leaves, that's not leaves.
It's usually that hypocotyl, like springing all the leaves and stuff out of the ground.
Yeah, and the first thing you see are the cotyledons.
Yep.
If you're growing a corn seed, you're going to see one cotyledon. Monocot, that's where it gets its name. If you're growing something like beans, you'll see two cotyledons. They kind of look like leaves, but they aren't leaves.
Yep.
They are the cotyledons. Some plants, they look even more like leaves, but it's above those cotyledons where you'll first see the true leaves forming. So that's kind of a general idea of seed anatomy and what happens during germination. And so now we're going to move on to something that all seeds have some form of dormancy.
It's true, and the reason seeds go dormant is because, genetically they don't want to end up right next to the parent. They want to spread, go forth, and prosper, right? A lot of seeds have mechanisms for, either latching onto an animal or blowing in the wind. They're trying to get out there into the world. So dormancy helps them to do that by inhibiting germination until it's out there and all of the conditions for germination are met. All seeds have some form of it. There's two different kinds: physical dormancy and chemical dormancy. Physical dormancy refers more to that hard seed coat. Like Dr. Joe mentioned, some seed coats are so hard they need to be physically damaged or roughed up through travel, or maybe they got digested by an animal and the acid from the animal's stomach will wear away at that seed coat. That's a process called scarification, and you can actually do that with a lot of seeds with that hard outer seed coat. I know okra is one that sometimes people will do this. Well, you can rub it on some sandpaper, you can nick it with a pair of nail clippers, something to break up that hard seed coat. You can even soak them in warm water, sometimes that helps. But there's a lot of different ways to do that. I think my favorite is just a little nail file. It's very easy for me to do that. I do that with my mamu seeds, which are little coral beans, and they're almost like BBs. They're so hard, and they will never germinate unless you do that. Heat, actually, is another way that dormancy can be broken. If you think about a lot of wildfires, it looks like everything's singed to a crisp, but a lot of seed coats need that fire to wear away at them, and then germination takes place after the fire has passed. So that's another way of scarification taking place.
Yeah, as Anna mentioned, with some of those even, there is a coating on the seed that requires the fire or intense heat to kind of melt that coating off.
Absolutely.
And it's that coating, that keeps the water from going in, as you'll see in a little bit, how important water is for germination. But that waxy coating is preventing water from entering the seed no matter how much water is around.
Yep.
And so it's just sitting there waiting for the right conditions to break that dormancy. The other dormancy we mentioned was chemical dormancy. And there's a process called stratification that can sometimes break that chemical dormancy. Stratification is essentially the seed is stored in a cold, moist environment for an extended period of time, usually 4 to 8 weeks.
Yep.
That's the type of dormancy that some people have probably broken with bulbs that they plant.
Yeah.
They'll store those in a cold environment for a period of time. And kind of what you're doing is imitating a winter that a lot of plants that we grow really would not do well in the environment that we're growing them in if they had to reproduce naturally, because they need that cold weather before the seed would germinate and propagate. And so you can fake that by doing stratification. 2 ways you can do it. You can take a paper towel and get it soaking wet and then squeeze it dry, and then place the seeds in the paper towel, put that inside of some tight container like a Ziploc bag of some type, and then stick it in your fridge in the darkest, in the drawer, in the dark part of the fridge. Leave it in there 4 to 8 weeks. You can usually find out somewhere in the literature that we give you as resources, or just look it up online, if certain seeds do need that type of stratification and how long it would take for that to take place. And then 4 to 8 weeks at 38 to 45 degrees, bring them out, and now they're ready to germinate. Another way is you can put the seeds in sand. A lot of people say mix 1 part seed to 2 parts sand.
I've done that too. I think both methods work pretty well, especially for wildflower seeds. A lot of wildflowers need to go through a stratification process, particularly milkweeds. That's a very common one that people will stratify. Just make sure you leave a note on your fridge that that's what's in the fridge so you don't forget it. It's easy to forget that you're in the middle. Always label your bags or your containers with what the seed is, the date you stratified it or started the process, and when it should be done.
Yeah, we're probably going to mention that several times during this entire course. We already mentioned it earlier about certain things about labeling.
Yes.
The thing about labeling, it's kind of like chocolate. You can never have too much of it. So label, label, label. And if we forget to tell you, remember, label. So what should you do to everything?
Label.
That's right.
Yep, and I'll show you guys some of my systems as we get into some of this. Seed germination does require 4 different things. The first being moisture. There has to be a water source for that to take place. There also has to be a correct temperature range. There has to be access to oxygen. Seeds live and breathe. They are living material. And there needs to be some light. That's, could come in the form of, light coming from above, maybe through disturbance of the soil, or just the heat or sensing of light from above.
And when we talk about moisture, the plants need just enough moisture. Now, if you put your seeds in a cup of water and float them around in there, then you got too much moisture. And if you have too much moisture, usually what's going to happen is your seeds are going to rot. They just don't germinate at all. And of course, if you have too little moisture, the seed won't ever even start to germinate. It has to have enough to get all those biochemical processes started.
Right.
And if you don't have the biochemical processes started with the right amount of moisture, then your seed's not going to germinate. But when the moisture is just right, the seed will germinate, the seedling will begin to mature, and you'll have a little plant. We're going to talk about air in a little bit, but one of the main reasons that too much moisture is a problem is not that there's too much water, but that there's not enough oxygen.
And we covered that in the soil module too, where the soil system has water, but it also has air, and roots need that, but also seedlings need that because they're developing a root system and they're developing into a plant. So that's very important.
Yeah. And besides the proper amount of moisture, there's usually an optimal temperature for germination for most seedlings.
There is, and this is a common question we get in the spring. Why isn't my seed or this thing germinating? Well, it might just be too early and the soil isn't quite warm enough. Okra is one that people try to plant a little too early, but if you see on this chart, okra likes it about 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is not that hot here in August or in April, but it is in August. So you have to kind of plan for these things, and it's easy to find these charts, especially for vegetable crops, of optimal temperature ranges.
Yeah, and that's why there are cool season crops and warm season crops, and usually the optimal germination temperature is similar to what the plant likes to grow in. So
Yes. Yep.
if you're thinking of lettuce, which is definitely a cool season crop, well, it really doesn't like hot temperatures.
It won't
and if
come
you
up.
have, yeah, if you plant lettuce and the temperature is above 68 degrees even,
Yeah.
they may not germinate, because lettuce likes the temperature to be right around 60 to 68 degrees for optimal germination.
I think too, with a lot of the hot weather crops or the summer crops, if people are trying to start them indoors, you might even need to use a heat mat underneath your seedling trays to get that temperature up high enough. Most of our houses are around 70 degrees, but if you look at this chart, tomatoes and peppers like it a little hotter than that. So I've seen where folks get specially made heat pads and put it underneath their germination trays to get those things a little bit of a boost so that they do germinate properly.
Yeah, that's an important point that Anna makes, because later on we're going to talk to you about when you're doing your seed germination, to have a site, place in your home or somewhere where you're going to put the seed while they germinate.
Yes.
Well, if you're germinating the warm season crops and you stick the tray of seeds out in your garage, and your garage isn't heated and it's getting down into the 50s at night,
Yeah,
your seed's probably not going to germinate. I mean, they're protected, you're giving them plenty of water, but they're not going to be warm enough. So consider all the factors involved in germination and what's required before you pick a spot to put your seeds while they're germinating.
Oxygen, we did touch on, is very important to seed germination. Seeds are actually breathing through the seed coat. They are alive, and they're not just some inanimate object. So access to oxygen is very important. And it's not a lot of oxygen that's needed, but it is needed.
Yeah, and because what's happening when the seed's germinating, think about it, there might be some out there, green seeds, but seeds, when they're germinating, they aren't green.
Nope.
Green means photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is how the plant makes its own food. And during photosynthesis, it needs carbon dioxide. But when the seed is germinating, it's got its own little packet of food in there. It can be the endosperm and the cotyledons. Those are all little packets of food that gets the seed started on before it can start making its own food.
That's right.
And when that little embryo is growing and developing, it's actually eating.
That's
And
right.
when plants eat,
They need oxygen.
they need oxygen, because all those biochemical processes require oxygen. So as a plant is respiring, transpiring, all the metabolic processes are going on, they need that oxygen. And if you don't give them the oxygen, it's not going to happen. Actually, that's one of the reasons that stratification is important with some seeds, is that at a certain temperature, the seed coat will allow air and oxygen in, but not water. And at another temperature, it allows water in, but not oxygen. So during the stratification process, the oxygen is moving in through the seed coat into where that little embryo is. So it kind of builds up this little store of oxygen to have it ready. So then when the temperature is elevated, you take it out of the fridge and put it in a warm environment with water. Now the water goes in, the oxygen's already there, so that embryo takes off. But if it doesn't have a chance to absorb that oxygen during the cold part of the process, it's not going to have it, and it's just not going to germinate.
Yep. That's so incredible.
Yeah. Now, Anna's going to tell you about light. And light's one of those that it may be important, it may not.
That's right.
Some seeds do, some seeds don't. So fill us in, Anna.
So the majority of seeds do not need exposure to light to germinate. Some of them do, though, and some common ones in your garden would include lettuce. Like if you sow lettuce too deeply in the soil, it's not going to come up. It needs that sort of filtered light coming through just the top of the soil where you're going to seed it shallowly. Savory is another one, lemon balm, chamomile. Those are seeds that you just kind of sprinkle on the surface and water in. You don't even cover them up.
Yeah.
So usually those smaller seeds do need light to germinate. A lot of weed seeds actually need light to germinate, and those seeds can lie dormant in the soil until you till it or the soil is disturbed, and as soon as they are exposed to light, that's when they're going to germinate. So that's an argument for minimal tillage or no-till, in my opinion.
And that's one of the reasons that mulch works really well in keeping weeds down.
Yep, because it's blocking that light.
They're blocking that light that those weed seeds need. So you cover them up, you put them in the dark, and they lay there.
Yeah. Some that might be inhibited by light are all the alliums, like your onions, your shallots, leeks, garlics, garlic chives. They might not germinate if there's too much light. So it goes both ways.
Seed packets, your seed catalogs will always tell you a recommended planting depth for your seed. If you got something that your friend gave you or your grandma gave you, they didn't label it and you aren't sure what it is, or even if you don't look on your seed packet. The good general rule of thumb is you bury the seed twice the seed diameter.
Yes, that's a good one that I've told people too, because you end up with a Ziploc baggie full of something, you don't always know what it is. But yeah, that 2 times the seed size, that's the depth.
I just take a pencil with a eraser on it, one that still is fairly new and flat.
Okay.
And I moisten the end of that eraser.
Oh, and pick it up.
Yeah, and now when
that's
I touch
smart.
it to a seed, it sticks to the eraser. And then I just put it into the soil, give the pencil a little bit of a turn, and it lets go of the seed. I take it out and it leaves the seed behind.
Oh, that's a good tip.
So using that, I'm actually
You're more precise.
putting the seed where I want it. I'm making the seed depth, the proper depth by how far I push it into the soil. And then with that little twist of the pencil, I pull it away and leave the seed behind. And there I've in one process, I've got the right depth, placed the seed, and I'm ready to cover it up.
All right, that's a good tip. So everybody remember that.
Yeah. Now, we're talking about growing seeds, planting seeds, starting your own seeds. You new gardeners, old gardeners, any type of garden, you may think, okay, why would I want to start my own seeds? I mean, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of material involved.
Yep, it's an
I
extra
have to have
step.
I have to have a special place to keep those. I can just go to the garden center or the big box stores and buy my started plant. I don't have to be thinking about 6 weeks in advance or anything like that. I just go buy my plant, stick it in the ground, and there I go. So why would you want to start your own plants? Well, we're going to tell you some reasons why you may want to start your own plants. The first one that I'm going to talk about is you extend the growing season. Now, you can also do this by buying transplants, but by starting your own plants, the plants transplanted out are usually 6 to 8 weeks old when you plant them in the soil. And you're timing those transplants so that you're putting them in the garden when the temperature, the moisture, everything is just right for that
perfect.
plant to flourish.
Yes.
But those are also the temperatures when the seed would germinate. Now, you're setting out a 6-week-old plant. So if you're planting in the garden, that's also the same time you would be planting the seeds in the garden for the optimal conditions to grow.
But now you got a 6-week jump.
That's right. You get
Yep, you're
6
ahead of
weeks
the game.
ahead. So what's that do for you? Well, you start harvesting ripe tomatoes, cucumbers,
6 weeks ahead
eggplant
of
6
everyone
weeks
else.
before they would.
That's
And you get to harvest for 6 weeks longer. You get that extra 6 weeks.
Yep.
So that's one good reason for starting your own transplants, because you can extend the growing season.
Another good reason is you get a wider choice of varieties by starting seeds. The garden centers don't have room to carry everything. They usually have a standard palette of varieties with different things. And I'm an adventurous gardener. I like trying new things every year, almost to a fault. But it's a lot easier for me to invest in a $2 or $3 packet of seeds that could come from literally anywhere in the world, and try something versus sticking with the old standards at the local garden center. So if you're an adventurous gardener and like to try growing new things, starting from seed is an economical way to do this and to, get stuff from all over the world, which is really cool.
It is fun. Yeah, as Anna mentioned, the wider selection of varieties. Really good garden centers, if you go, let's talk about tomatoes. If you go looking for a variety of tomato, and you go to a really, really good garden center, they may have 15 to 20 varieties to choose from.
That's a good one, though.
That would be a really good one.
Most of them have 3 or 4.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, do you know how many varieties of tomatoes there are available? We mentioned that, I think, once already. But there are 27,000 varieties of tomato out there. So if you go to a really, really good garden center and they're offering, let's say they're offering 20 varieties, that's still 0.05% of the varieties available. So if you really want to be an adventurous gardener like Anna and grow something really funky or strange, You're not going to find it at the garden center.
Nope.
They're going to have the things that are
everyone
most
has.
popular, that everyone likes to grow, and so you're going to be part of the crowd.
Yeah, if you want your garden to stand out, start shopping for seeds and hoarding seeds. Pretty soon your neighbors are going to come over and start pointing and say, "What is that? Where'd you get it?" And it's not from the garden center.
That's right. Even with heirloom tomatoes, you'll usually maybe only find 4 to 5 varieties at a garden center.
It's usually the most common ones too.
Right.
And I like some of the funkier, more flavorful ones, and I have to start them from seed. And I don't mind putting that time and investment into it because the payout is so good.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Can't beat the flavor of some of those varieties. And with by starting your own seed, you also have control over the environmental conditions. Remember, we mentioned moisture,
yes.
temperature, aeration, and light, how important those are for the seed to germinate. Well, if you're starting your own seeds inside, then you have almost full control over how much moisture they get, how much light they get, how much air they get, the temperature that they're growing in. And so you're going to have better success with your seeds. If you just plant them out in the ground, you'll get germination if everything works out just right.
Yeah, if it's just so. I mean, at my house, I have 4 different germination zones with slightly different conditions. And, you know, I'm at the point now where I know where I need to start things, if they need a lot of light or not a lot of light, a lot of water, not a lot of water. But that's because I've been doing it for a long time. But I have that control, and I'm able to be a more successful gardener because I can kind of plan for these things and move things around as needed. Also, starting from seed, it does save you money because I can load up my car with a couple $100 worth of transplants for my garden, or I can have 5 to 10 years worth of garden plants in seed form just in a box in my fridge. Right. And to me, that's really exciting, and I like sharing my seeds. You know, there's no way I'm going to use everything I have at this point. I've been hoarding seeds forever. It's fun to share seeds with others, and it's a good way to build community. So it's a good way to save money and build community and share.
Yeah, and you've been doing that a lot this year. I know that.
Yeah. So some other points for starting transplants are that it does really help you have the exact number of plants that you need to grow or want to grow. For me, I seed what I need for my garden, and if I have extras, I give them away. But it is a nice thing to do. Starting seeds for transplants also increases your survival rate. You're a little more successful generally.
Yeah, because usually, as Anna mentioned, it increases the survival rate of your plant because you're giving the seed an ideal condition to germinate. So it makes a little plant. And now when you transplant that little plant out into the garden, that little plant has a much better chance of surviving because it's already starting to mature, to build, have its own natural defenses. It's got a good root system. Like you said, it's got a head start. So it's going to survive much better than if you plant 2 or 3 seeds in the garden and then the little plant comes up. Well, it has to start out now as a seedling. The seed has to survive long enough for it to germinate in the garden. And once the little seedling comes up, it's still very tender, very susceptible to changes in moisture or temperature, or it looks delectable to some little
caterpillar
come along.
By. Yeah, I had that happen this year.
So that really it increases the survival rate of the plants that you have in your garden because you're starting with a nice little tough plant to begin with.
Yeah, it also reduces your weed competition because when you direct seed things into the garden, it's sometimes very hard to tell what's a weed and what's a vegetable that's coming up, especially when they're itty-bitty like this and everything's all jumbled up. And sometimes the weeds will outcompete the crop that you're trying to grow. They'll shade it out. They'll use up all the soil moisture. They'll use up the nutrients nearby. So that competition can sometimes stunt whatever you're actually trying to grow. So I like having a nice little transplant that I've grown in a pot, setting it out there. I know what it looks like. I know where I put it. And then I know what is a weed nearby that I can pull later. Or I can mulch around it too, because it's big enough that I can put down a nice layer of mulch.
Yeah, that's one of the really nice advantages because when you start with a larger transplant and stick it in your garden, it's got a head start on the weeds, so it survives well. Plus, like you say, Anna, you can mulch.
It's not going to get lost.
Right. Yep. You're not going to bury it. So mulching is a really great way to control weeds. And by using the transplants, you're giving your plant a good start. Okay, now Anna, we have talked about starting your own transplants, and that's a good idea with most vegetables,
Yes.
but there are some that you really don't do well by starting and then transplanting.
They don't like being moved.
That's right.
Yeah.
Some of those you can find out by looking on your seed packet or in your seed catalogs. They'll usually tell you whether they can do well as a transplant or not. But some that I can think of off the bat would be like beets or carrots.
Yeah.
You think about those are plants that the main part that you want is developing underground. And so starting it out as a transplant, and then when you're transplanting it from the seed packet, the roots are always going to get some type of stress, and it just doesn't do well. I know there are some others out there that don't do well.
Yeah,
but
the
those are a
leafy
few.
greens, you really don't need to. Yeah, just make sure you read your seed packets. See what does say direct sow. Those are the key words. If you're supposed to put it right in the garden, it would be directly sown.
That's true. They'll tell you that. So check your seed catalog and your seed packets. But in most cases, starting your seeds as transplants is a good idea.
I agree.
So now we're going to talk to you about planting, because that's what you do with seeds. I mean, we told you what a seed is, and the plant loves having a seed, and it's a survival mechanism. But as gardeners, what do we want to do with the seeds? We want to plant them and get a new plant from it. So now we're going to move into things, pointers about planting, some things that are important, and kind of help you guys to be successful with your seeds.
Yeah, it's a good thing to kind of pre-plan, and I'm starting to do this now that we're in summer and the fall is coming, and I'm starting to buy seeds for fall. So I'm backdating about 6 weeks. I want to start stuff in trays 6 weeks before I want to plant it into my garden. That's a good sort of general rule. It's not going to be the same for everything, but I think that's a nice guideline or goalpost. So I've got my seed trays ready. I've been gathering materials. I've got all my pots ready. I just sorted them this weekend. I have my seed starting mix. Remember we talked about that in the soils? You want a nice light seed starting mix. You don't want to use the soil from the ground or maybe even old potting mix. I like buying a fresh bag of it, seed starting mix.
Yeah.
And then I have my seed starting area, which is just a table in my backyard. And I think Chris has some good footage coming up later in this module of what that looks like and how I'm working. I have everything laid out. I've got my tags. I have my Sharpie for labeling the trays, and I'm just ready to go. It's almost like an assembly line.
Yeah, and as Anna mentioned, having your seeds, the varieties you want to grow ready, you don't want to wait until a week or so before you want to plant your seeds to start looking around and ordering your seeds.
Yep.
If it's a really nice variety and you start to order it a week before you want to plant it, the seed catalog may not even have it available, and
They
if
might
they
not
do,
have it, and it might take forever
it might
to
take
get
a
here.
while to get there.
Yep.
So that's one variety you're not going to be able to grow. So really, before planting, there's a lot of planning that you want to do, as Anna mentioned, and she did mention the seed starting mix. Usually in the garden centers or stuff, they might have one they call a germinating mix, and another one they call a seed starting mix. Now there is a little bit of difference between those. Usually the germinating mix is very, very fine, very, very fine material. There's no soil. There's usually perlite, vermiculite, peat moss, things like that in there. Things that are going to hold the moisture, very fine textured, so the seed's not going to
doesn't have
fall
to
in
struggle
through a pore and get buried too deeply, and it's easy for the hypocotyl to push the plantlet up through that nice fine soil. Seed starting mix, usually it's a little coarser, and one big difference, sometimes they'll have some fertilizer in it.
It has some fertilizer in it, which I like because generally I'm sowing things into a tray that it's going to stay in for about 3 to 4 weeks unless I bump it up. So I can get away with seeding things into small containers, and it has some fertilizer in that seed starting mix to draw from and grow. And then when it gets big enough for a bigger pot, I can bump it up. So I like using the seed starting mix for that reason. There's a lot of different container possibilities, and this spring, the garden centers were all closed, so people were kind of scrambling, and I saw some real creative containers for seed starting. Egg cartons, old plastic Tupperware containers, anything you can poke a hole in the bottom, people were starting seeds in. I like recycling my flats and my pots from the garden center, and people drop them off for me to recycle. You know, things like that can last forever. Just have a stack of them somewhere that you can use year after year.
Mm-hmm. Now, Anna mentioned reusing some of the pots that she got her plants in earlier. Well, a really good idea with those before you use them is to dip them in a 15%, 10% to 15% Clorox solution.
Yeah, that just keeps it
that
clean.
bleach solution will essentially sterilize those containers. So you're going to start with clean material because especially if someone drops off used containers,
where it's coming from.
Yeah, that plant may have had disease in there, and those little spores or bacteria are sticking to the plastic.
And you don't
just
know.
rinsing them is not going to wash them off. So it's really a good idea to bleach those, to dip them.
Yep, and I have a couple of big like Rubbermaid tubs that I do that in my backyard, and I just set it up on my seed starting table, and I'll just do a bunch of them all at once, and then they're good to go. So.
Yeah, I mean, and the nice thing about using the bleach is you can dip them, and you really don't even have to rinse them off. You dip them, put them out in the sun, and let them dry. The Clorox, the sodium hypochlorite will evaporate, so it's not going to be there anymore, and they'll dry and they'll be ready for you to use.
That's right.
But I hope you guys noted that Anna said with the Tupperware or any of those plastic things, anything you can poke a hole in.
That's right.
That is key. Drainage, drainage, drainage. When you're growing plants of any kind, they got to have drainage.
Yep.
And so if you are going to reuse an old Tupperware or an old yogurt carton or something like that, those things can be used.
Yep, as long
but
as
make
you
sure you put holes in the bottom that the water can drain through, because otherwise you might end up overwatering your plants.
It's easy to do.
We've already told you what's going to happen if there's too much moisture.
That's right.
And when you're choosing your varieties, you're probably going to see something in the catalog where they mention zone.
Yes.
USDA zone or good and grows well in zone 5. If vegetables, that's important. With ornamentals, you're going to see it a lot. So
every seed packet has that.
A lot of gardeners know that. There's always something in the catalog. So what does zone really mean?
It's a hardiness map, essentially. Here in New Orleans, we're in zone 9B, but on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain, it's 8A. So even just that, 30-minute drive, it's a whole different climate zone.
Yeah, and these zone maps are easy to find. The USDA puts these together, makes them out. Yep. And essentially what the zones are based on is the average cold temperature, when it gets above freezing, when it gets below freezing, the average temperatures, lowest temperatures during the year. That's right. Also during the growing season, the temperatures. So they look at all that data, and then, as we told you, plants have an optimal temperature at which they like to grow. And if we're in zone 9, and there's a plant that likes zone 6 as its optimal temperature,
we're going to be pushing it.
Yeah,
it's
probably going to fail. If not fail, it's not going to do very well at all.
Yeah.
So zone map and knowing what zone you're in is really important. Those zone maps, you can find them online, and know your zone.
Today, I'm going to start a flat of peppers. These are purple sweet beauty peppers. It's an heirloom variety. It's open pollinated. You could, of course, use seeds that you've saved from your own peppers or some that you bought from the store. I'm using a 32 cell flat here. These are nice pull-apart pots. You could use 4-inch pots. You could use recycled garden pots that you might have from other projects. Anything about this size would do. I'm also using a sterile seed starting mix. You don't want to use compost or any kind of topsoil or soil from your garden beds because it's going to be too heavy for these seeds to get established. Everything the seed needs to germinate and get to a good size, about this size, is within itself. So you don't need to add any fertilizers, anything like that. Just a good light potting mix like this. And we're going to fill the tray. We fill it all the way to the top of each pot. Okay, and then I kind of lightly press down with my fingers to make an indent. This works for a lot of vegetable seeds. They don't need to be buried very deeply, and they just need to be lightly covered. So if you kind of indent your trays or your pots like this, that's usually plenty deep enough. It's probably about a ½ inch deep. So here's our Purple Beauty pepper seeds. It's a nice sweet pepper variety. And since I'm fairly confident that these are good quality seeds, I just purchased them from a nursery. I'm going to seed one per cell. So I'm not going to double up because I don't want to have to separate them out later. And I want to give them plenty of room to get established. So I'm just going to seed one per pot. And this is a good activity for kids. It teaches a lot of good hand-eye coordination. And gardening is something you can do for the whole family. So we've got one per hole. We're going to put the extra ones back in here, close it up, and now we're going to lightly cover them. So usually what I do is just kind of shake a little bit of soil over the top and use my other hand to smooth it down, break up any clumps. Okay, like so. And we're going to label them, of course, because when you're seeding a lot of things, it's easy to forget what you have. So these are Purple Beauty sweet peppers. And we're going to stick that in the tray here. And I'm going to water this tray after I stick it in my nursery. I'll probably seed a couple of trays all at once and give them a good soaking because this mix is pretty dry. And seeds do need that moisture to germinate properly.
Oh, and once you got your seeds planted,
I just move them to my germination areas after that, and usually they come up right away. So.
Yeah, that's true. And with your germination area, make sure that you got it picked out and ready before you start planting. You don't want to have seed flats that all planted and ready to go, and then you realize,
nowhere to put them.
What am I going to do? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good thing to have a sunny location. Like you can get stuff going in a shadier spot or indoors even, but have a nice sunny spot to move them out to, unless it's summertime and sometimes sun is too much sun.
Right.
And you need a shade cloth or afternoon shade. So that's something you kind of have to feel out over time too.
Yeah, as Anna mentioned, they can get really hot. So
they'll dry
almost
out.
Always you don't want direct sun, even if you're keeping them inside. Get them where they're going to get some sunlight, maybe not direct sun. If it is direct sun, it's the morning sun.
Yeah, I like the morning sun best for my seedlings because they're still pretty small. They're delicate. And you think about it, they're in a pot or a tray that's not a lot of soil. If they dry out, they're done pretty quick.
That's it. They dry out, they're dead. So moisture is important. And that sun, as soon as you see the little seedling germinated, you want to get it light because once it gets there, that little seedling is looking for light.
It needs it.
And I'm sure everyone's seen it's essentially, the term is etiolated, but it's a seedling that is long and slender. It's very skinny. Maybe the leaves are kind of pale green or even almost white.
They'll never recover from that.
They'll never recover because they didn't get the light they needed just as they were germinating. And so as soon as they germinate, give them the light. They're going to start making their own food then. And so that's really, really important that you give them that light right away.
So I have 3 different zones to my home nursery. This is the sun nursery. It gets blasted in the afternoon. You can see this is full sun. Things like solanaceous crops like these peppers. I have some cherry tomatoes, fennel, the sun-loving herbs. This is a really good spot to give them a good start. So this is my shade house. It's where I put the trays I freshly seed. And it's nice because it has this 50% shade cloth over top, and it doesn't get too washed out with the rainfall as well. This helps diffuse any heavy rains. So it still gets a little bit of sunlight, and this is a really great area for these freshly seeded trays and for things that I've made cuttings off of. This is a 1-week-old tray of habaneros that I sprouted in the shade house on the other side of my house. These are ready to come to stage 2. This is a nice area. It's not covered, so they get the full benefit of the rain. It does get morning sun and afternoon shade, which is nice for these tender seedlings. And they're going to stay out here for another week or two until they get maybe about 2 inches tall, and then it'll be time to bump them up and put them in the sun area.
And speaking of making their own food, what are they going to need?
They're going to need fertilizer.
Yes.
And a lot of folks will either mix a fertilizer into their starting mix. We talked about some mixed options. I like using fish emulsion. That's a really good thing to water some fertilizer in for seedlings. It's a little stinky. You could use Miracle-Gro. There's a lot of products out there. People make compost tea. Like, just do a little research, whatever works for you.
Yeah. One that I like to use is the water-soluble fertilizer. But for my seedlings, I'll make it maybe quarter strength.
Yeah, you don't need as much.
If they say use a tablespoon per gallon, then I'll use a quarter tablespoon per gallon, because those little seedlings,
they're not going to use that.
They're not going to need
That's
it.
Right.
And if it's too strong, you can actually burn those little roots as they're developing.
Can. Yeah.
And so if you're going to use the liquid fertilizers, don't use full strength. Go ahead and use half strength, quarter strength, until that plant gets up and strong. Yeah. And then you can go ahead and start giving it regular fertilizer. Now, you mentioned bumping up earlier.
Yes.
So why don't you go ahead and tell our class what bumping up is.
So when I'm seeding trays, I'm trying to get the most amount of seedlings in as dense of an area as possible while still giving them enough space to grow. As they exceed the container that they're in, it's time to bump them up to something bigger so they can then grow to a larger size. I might do this once, I might do this twice before I plant stuff out into the garden. I sometimes start like cucumber plant. I'll start in a little pot, maybe 1 inch by 1 inch by 2 inches, but then I'll bump it up into a 4-inch pot if I'm not ready to plant right away. That gives me some more time. It gives me a couple more weeks because it's got more room to grow. And then if I have to wait even longer, which sometimes I do, I'll use a gallon pot and bump it up into a gallon, and that's bought me another 2 or 3 weeks. So that's essentially what bumping up is. Okay, today we're going to bump up these habaneros. These are pepper seeds that I planted maybe about 3 weeks ago. And you can see they have their first pairs of true leaves. So they've germinated and they're actively growing. And since this was a sterile seed starting mix, I need to bump them up into a larger pot with a bit of fertilizer in it so that they can get a little bit bigger before I plant them in the garden. These guys would kind of get lost in the garden if we tried to plant these at this size. So we're going to give them some more room. And I'm using just my normal seed starting potting mix, but I'm going to mix up a special batch with a little bit of fertilizer. This is a 12-3-6 fertilizer, so it's pretty high in nitrogen. It's a granular product. You could also use organic sources if you really wanted to. Blood meal is a good source of nitrogen, compost, things like that. And we have a lot more info of that coming up. So I'm going to mix in maybe about 4 tablespoons worth for this tray. Mix it in well. And these are 4-inch pots. This is what we're going to bump these seedlings up to. You can see right now they're in maybe about 1-inch cells, and they've got some roots developing. They've reached the bottom of their soil that they have available to them, and they are just ready to get bumped up. So we're going to fill this flat with 4-inch pots. In addition to them having their first sets of true leaves, the roots have also developed to the bottom of each of these cells. So it is time to bump them up. You don't want them to get too root bound in there because they tend to hit the end of the world and then they stop growing. So you can see this has a nice set of roots on it that went all the way to the bottom of this 2-inch deep cell, and it's ready to bump up into a larger space. And what I do is I just sort of make a small little depression and then gently pop each one in there. I try to disturb it as little as possible. And I'm kind of gently grabbing the stem right at the base, but I'm not yanking it. I'm kind of lifting it out. And you could wait till they were a little bigger. These could probably sit in this tray another week if I really needed to, like if it were raining. But this is a good size to move them. So I finished potting up this tray of habaneros. They're in their 4-inch pots, and they can stay in here for another 4 to 6 weeks easily. They've got plenty of fertilizer in their soil. It's a well-draining mix, and they can get maybe about this tall before we plant them out into the garden. So let's dig into saving seeds. This is a pretty new hobby for me. I've done it very casually over the years, but it's turned out to be a heck of a lot of fun, especially because I like to share. There are some reasons for saving seeds, and what I primarily like is that there's the possibility of creating new varieties. So as I'm saving seeds from local plants, there's local conditions or tastes or genetic material that's all going to go into that new variety. So over time, inadvertently, I'm selecting for something completely local and new. That to me is very exciting. You can also save a lot of money. Saving seeds, it's easy as investing in these little blank seed packets and labeling them, storing them properly, but essentially these are free seeds from the botanical garden here that I just walked around and collected. If I were to pay for this out of a seed catalog, I'd be looking at probably about $50. So it can save you a lot of money. What I like too is that through seed saving, and this is an old technique, you're actually preserving genetic diversity. And we hear a lot about people trying to grow heirloom varieties. Those heirlooms exist because people saved seeds. From year to year, they preserved those heirlooms to plant for future years. You can also select for pest resistance. So when I'm saving seeds, I'm looking for the plants that did the best. I don't want something that was struggling in my garden that I had to really baby along, that maybe every caterpillar in the county came to nibble on. Pest and disease resistance is something that you can select for by choosing healthy parent plants. And it's also a really good way to just be aware of what's in your garden and the life cycles in your garden. Gardens are a living system, so you can really connect to what you grow.
Yeah, I like, as Anna mentioned, the idea of connecting with what you grow. A little sideline story here for you. My mom used to grow oxheart tomatoes. And
those are good.
That's my favorite tomato of all time. Recently, I've been looking for oxheart tomato seeds. And I could find some that were kind of pink, or there was one called a Hungarian oxheart.
Okay.
But I couldn't find
any the specific one
specific to what Mom used to grow that looked the same. I tried growing some of those. The flavor just wasn't the same.
As you remembered.
It was different. And lo and behold, I got a call from my sister, who still lives in North Carolina, and she said, "Hey, Joe, guess what I found in the bottom of the freezer?"
Oh no, the seeds.
It was the seeds that my mom had saved from oxheart tomatoes.
That's amazing.
Almost 20 years ago. And she said, so I found these seeds and they were labeled. Mom was a good labeler, so she knew what they were. And she planted some of them. And they germinated and grew and made nice plants, make the nice oxheart tomato.
It was what you remembered?
It was what I remembered. And so she's going to give me some of those seeds. And now I've got that heirloom that I can save the seed from year to year and keep producing it. But like you said, now every time I go out into my garden, strolling through, looking at my tomato plants, and I see an oxheart tomato on my tomato plant,
you're going to think of
I'm going to think of my mom, her out there gardening, and all those great meals at the table. So
I love that.
That's a great way to connect with what you're growing.
I'm so glad you said that too, because I was close to my grandparents who were big gardeners, and I actually saved seeds from a few things from their garden, which was in Michigan. And they've been gone, but I still have that living memory of them every time I'm out in the garden. So it's way cool.
Yeah, that's one thing that also can make gardening great for you, because you can have those little connections if you're saving your seed, and those special things that maybe don't mean anything to anyone else, but they mean a lot to you.
I love it.
And so you're talking about saving seeds, and so there's one important point we need to make to you about saving seeds. Now, you'll see this usually in the descriptions of the seeds you get in the catalogs. You hear it often when they talk about heirloom vegetable plants.
Yeah.
There are open pollinated plants and there are hybrid plants. Okay, what's the difference between open pollinated and hybrid? Okay, open pollinated varieties, those are the varieties which, if they're properly isolated from varieties of the same species, they will produce the seed that is genetically true to type. That means that the seed from these fruits that you collect and save will make a plant identical or nearly so to the parent it came
It's going to
from.
be pretty close.
And the reason that happens is over the course of time, you can say that the genetic material or genetic makeup of this particular variety is kind of stabilized. And usually stabilization of genetic material in a plant like that means that it has become homozygous for the different genes, which means it has the exact same gene
In
on
every
both
combo.
of the chromosomes, and it's almost always a genetic marker or a genetic trait that is dominant.
Yes.
Which means it's going to be expressed as the preferential gene. And that happens over the course of time with these plants constantly mating back and forth, back to each other. That genetic material will stabilize, right?
Yeah.
But do note that we said if it's properly isolated from other varieties of the same species. Now, if you have open pollinated tomato plants growing next to hybrid tomato plants, chances are that first year or two, if you save the seeds from your heirlooms on open pollinated, they're going to be true to type. But if you keep doing that year after year, then what's going to happen? You're probably going to start to see some changes because guess what? If you have an open pollinated tomato plant or an open pollinated variety of anything, and it gets genetic material from a plant that is a variety different from it, you have now created a hybrid.
That's true.
Whether that hybrid shows as something morphologically different when the seed grow or not, you have created a hybrid. So open pollinated, they're generally, you can save the seed, but if you really want to be perfect about it, you'll keep those isolated from other varieties.
Yeah, and there's a variety of techniques that you can use. This is a pretty good book. You can Google how to plant breed too, or how to isolate your open pollinated varieties. This is seed to seed saving. It's a manual, and it has a lot of tips for each type of vegetable or seed that you might want to save for keeping that genetic material isolated and preventing the formation of hybrids. So that information is out there. You just have to go look for it.
Now, what are hybrids? Well, the hybrid plant varieties are ones that have been deliberately, selectively cross-pollinated.
That's right.
So usually a breeder knows particular characteristics in one parent that they want and particular characteristics in another parent they want. And then they cross-pollinate those. And then they grow the seed. And if the seed and the plants resulting from that cross give them the characteristics they're looking for, they know, okay, now I know how to produce this plant and get the characteristics I'm after. And so if you buy hybrid tomato seeds, let's say you're buying a tomato seed, the big boy is a hybrid, and consistently, year after year, what those plant breeders are doing are taking the same parent, female and male, each year and crossing them and producing those seed. So they are producing this hybrid seed every single year from that cross.
It's a recipe almost.
Right, it is a recipe. And that way they know that the hybrid they sell is going to give them what they want and give you, the gardener, what you want. And so hybrid means the genetics aren't settled yet. There's some difference there. And so if you collect seed from a hybrid plant, chances are there's going to be genetic difference in the seed and the plants that come from it. Now, the genetic differences might be small. They might not even be noticeable. You might collect a hybrid seed, grow plants from it, and it looks exactly the same, gives you the same flavor. Well, if you do that for usually even more than 2 or 3 years,
you're
2 or 3 cycles, you're going to start to see that difference because
it's a slight deviation each generation.
Those genetics just aren't settled, and the majority of the seed produced aren't genetically true to type. There is some difference in them. And so, as Anna mentioned, collecting seed from that sort of a cross, you might be developing some new varieties. But if you actually want the parent type back again, you want to go back and buy those hybrid seed again rather than saving them from the fruit that you grow yourself.
Yeah. So let's dig into how to save seeds. I have a variety of different things here that I've been saving and working with, but as a general starting place, you notice everything here is mature. I don't have any like flowers that I could put in a bouquet. Everything's dried out. Everything's spent. The seeds are fully formed.
Even your veggies here look like they're ripening up.
This is a pepper that's ripe. In another day or two, this would be squishy and you wouldn't want to pick it. Everything's kind of at the end of its natural life cycle or its lifespan. So you do want to wait till things are in that state. You can remove the seed from fruit. Anything fleshy like this, you would cut open and just kind of pop this guy open and see what's inside. See all the seeds in there? If this was at my house, I would actually remove all these and lay them out on some paper towel to dry down because it's still pretty moist in there. It's pretty wet. And for these to actually be viable, you don't want them to be moist and rot or get moldy. You know, you want to dry these out as soon as possible. So I actually have a little work table in my house where it gets good airflow, good light, and I let things dry out before I put them in these little seed packets. You can get these at any office supply store. I'll label them, and then I'll store them in the fridge for later. So all this stuff is mature. It's ready to separate the seeds from, and that's where you really want to start.
And just a point about Anna mentioned about drying the seed, like from the pepper, tomato, things like that. If you don't dry the seed, allow it to fully dry before you store it, you're going to put it into a seed packet.
Yep.
And there's going to be not enough moisture there for the seed to germinate. The seed also hasn't fully toughened up its seed coat, so it's not going to be as resistant to environmental changes. And like I said, there's not enough moisture there for the seed to germinate, but there's probably enough moisture there for fungi to grow on.
Exactly. You'll end up with a bunch of moldy seed packets in your fridge, which no one likes.
Yep. And once the mold starts munching on that seed, it kills it. So it's not going to be...
You don't want that. And you do need to clean the seed, like tomatoes. I'm glad you mentioned. We've all sliced into a tomato, and the seeds kind of have like a little sack around them, like a fleshy...
jelly-like stuff.
Yeah, it's like jelly. You do want to remove that and then dry the seeds, because if you leave that on there, it's just going to rot, and then your seed isn't viable.
Another thing about that jelly, on tomato seeds and then some other seeds, when the seed is in the fruit, plants are pretty smart.
Yeah, they are. They've been doing
when the
this a
seed
while.
is in the fruit, the plant is coating it with something to keep that seed from germinating. No matter how mature it is,
it can hold.
It won't germinate.
Yep.
And you think, why is the seed not germinating and starting to grow inside the fruit? Now, you will see that occasionally, but it's very, very rare. And it's because that plant is actually putting a chemical coating. Sometimes it's a gelatinous material, like you said on the tomato. It's coating that seed with something that inhibits it and keeps it from germinating because it wants that seed to get out, get away. It wants that seed to leave home before it starts to grow and develop its own life. So it's making this material that keeps that seed from germinating. But what you're doing is you're cleaning them, washing that off. Now, like you said, if you leave it on there and let it dry onto the tomatoes are a really good example. And you let it dry on the tomato seed, well, when you put those seeds in an area where they got lots of moisture, that gelatinous material will take up moisture again too, and it just may keep that seed from germinating just like it's supposed to because you didn't get rid of it. So cleaning and drying, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, and you see here I've got these little, they're actually cake cooling racks, but these are really nice little drying racks. I can actually stack these, and I just lay things out on these Tupperware lids, and it works great. There's good airflow around everything. I'm not crowding things. I try to harvest my seed heads on days that it's dry and hasn't rained, and after the dew has kind of evaporated, so I'll even just walk around with my little clippers in the afternoon and some baggies and even just clip them into these little containers. When I do that though, you'll notice every single one of these has a label. And it's just a little scrawled on piece of paper, but that stays with those seeds through this entire process until they're dried, until I've cleaned them and removed, you know, all this extra material that I don't need. I just want the seeds. And then I'll put those seeds into these packets and label them with the date that I collected them and what that seed is. That way there's no confusion. You know, I go through my box of seeds in the spring or when I'm seeding trays and I know exactly what's in this packet. I know how old it is, and I know you know, a little bit of its history. So that's sort of the name of the game here. Label things.
And labeling. We can't emphasize that enough. But another thing that I like to put on my seed packet label sometimes, most of the time I will do it, is a name, who collected it, or initials or something. Because if I collected the seed, and Anna collects seed, and Chris collects seed, and Paula collects seed, and we have all our little seed packets, and we have them all labeled, and then we trade seeds, we share seeds. Well, now, if I get one that's really, really good, I say, I love this, I want to grow this again, I don't have any more seed, and I didn't save any. Where did I get that?
Exactly.
And now, I either have to rack my memory, or maybe I wrote it in my seed gardening, in my gardening journal. But if it's written there on the little packet that I took the seed out of, that, oh, Anna collected this, I just call up Anna and say, hey, Anna, do you have any more of that seed? Or if not, can you tell me where I can get some?
I'm glad
because
you
I know where
mentioned
it came from.
Yeah, I've actually done that with loquats this year. I have Brad's loquats and I have Becca's loquats, and I want to see whose is better. So you got to label them. I think it's important too, like I save a lot of native seeds and wildflowers, and I want to know where I collected them from in the state. So I'll even put where that location was and the date, and that way I know, oh, this came from over by Shreveport versus down here in New Orleans, and there's slight differences there. So, you know, it's just good to keep track of that information. That way, if you do get something that you really like, you can go back and find it again.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a good idea. Because the inverse of that is if I collect seed on the other side of the lake, and it's something I really like, it's growing nicely, looks really good, and then I collect it and bring it down here and plant it, and it's like,
why isn't this doing well?
What's wrong with this plant? It grew so well. I mean, it looked beautiful. It was something I wanted to have all around the house, and now down here it's terrible. If I look at my seed packet, I can say, oh, I collected this on the North Shore.
Exactly.
I collected this across the lake. There's a whole different growing zone, as Annie mentioned up there. They're a zone 8. We're a 9B down here. Maybe that's why the seeds and the plants were performing differently. But I have that on my label.
So you can
figure I can figure it out. I know what might be the problem.
Yeah, because plants adapt to local conditions. So our conditions are not the same as where you might have collected them. So it's always best to collect locally, but I like to explore in my garden, as you said, and try new things, and sometimes things will surprise you. So it's worth a shot to collect things elsewhere and see if they grow in your location. So don't be discouraged. It's all a big experiment, essentially. So.
Okay, now you've gone out and you've collected your seeds, you got them in your little packets here, you got it all labeled, and usually you're collecting seeds at the end of the growing season. So you aren't going to start a whole new crop of seeds or plants right then.
No.
You're saving them for future seasons, for future plantings, for future growing seasons, future gardens. So I've got them collected, and as we mentioned, that the seeds are little survival packets of the plant. So what am I going to do with them?
You got to store them.
You got to store them.
Put them somewhere.
Now this is really important for you guys. Make note of this. You can't just take your seed packets and shove them in the kitchen drawer, or put them in the back of your sock drawer, or leave them laying on the windowsill, or out in the garage.
You got to store them properly.
If you don't store them properly, you're going to be really disappointed, because the seed is going to lose its viability. It may get moist, wet somehow, and start to germinate and then die.
It might get too hot and cook.
It could cook.
I've had some that did that I forgot in a storage shed, and it got too hot in the summer, and then they were toast. So.
Or some little animal finds them and says, hey, I love bagged lunch. And there you go. You've lost your seeds. So we're going to give you a couple of ideas that are important, things that are really important. And this is generally for almost all seed. These are the conditions that you want to save them under. If you have some funky seed, some seeds require a little bit different conditions, but these are the conditions that majority of seeds will do well and have long viability at.
Yeah, you do want to make sure the location you're storing them in is dry. You don't want it humid. You don't want any kind of moisture. So the 6 to 8% relative humidity is good. And I'm storing stuff at my house in a couple of fridges. I have dedicated seed storage fridges in my back room of my house. And I make sure that, you know, there's no ice buildup from the freezer, and, you know, the seal is correct on the fridge so that it's not humid in that environment.
Sometimes I'll even throw in a packet of desiccant.
Yes, if you are getting a bunch of stuff in the mail and you get those little silica or the desiccant things, save those and throw them in with your seeds, and that will help draw any excess moisture out. That's a really good tip. I also keep it very cool in those fridges. It's 32 to 45 degrees. Usually I'm closer to that 45 degree range. And I make sure that those fridges are on. I don't let anyone unplug them because I don't want to lose that investment. At this point, I've got years worth of seed built up, and I want to take care of them so that I can use them later.
Now, we're talking about buying your seed packets and having enough seed to last for several years. Now, when we say that, we are talking about properly stored,
yes,
which is what we just talked about, is having them in a low humidity, cool environment. So if you buy seeds, you take seeds out of the packet and plant them, go ahead and as soon as possible get those seeds back into the proper storage conditions,
yes,
so that they'll last longer. And seeds actually, over the course of time, gardeners have looked at them, and even seed companies produce them, and there's some general ideas of how long seed will last. All seed don't last the same length of time when they're stored.
They don't.
We have a little table here for you that shows the average years that seed will survive under the proper storage conditions. So you can take a look at this, and you can see it's pretty variable.
All over the place.
Yeah, it's all over the place. Like something like broccoli. You can have broccoli seed, and anywhere from 3 to 5 years you can have viable seed. So that's a long-term investment for a lot of crops with broccoli.
Yeah, but if you look at corn, like if you're saving sweet corn, or at my house I'm saving Oaxacan green corn, it's a really cool green ear of corn this year. That corn needs to be planted almost every year because it's only viable for 1 to 3 years.
Yeah. And we already mentioned lettuce being one of those funky seeds earlier about requiring light. Well, lettuce seed is also one of those that most varieties lose viability pretty fast, even under the ideal storage conditions.
Yep.
Now, depending on the variety, lettuce seed can last from, maybe 1 year to 6 years. I usually tend to lean toward the lower storage side because there's nothing more disappointing than to take out a packet of seed of lettuce. I'm getting ready for my cool season crops. I sow the seed, and I figure I want to grow, 20 lettuce plants. And I figure, well, I've stored these seeds for maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe 3. So I'm going to plant twice as many seed. So I'll make sure I get in plants. So I want 20 plants. I plant 40 seeds, and 5 come up.
I've had that happen. It's frustrating.
It's really frustrating.
And it's a waste of time and space in your garden, too. So it's good to have fresh seed whenever possible. Use some of those, less viable seeds up in the same season if you can. Like, I don't know, people get free seeds all the time, and I feel like sometimes they're improperly stored, and then people think they're bad gardeners, but no, it's just bad seed.
Right. What I do with the lettuce seed, as you mentioned earlier with even the plants, is if I buy a packet of lettuce seed, I'll start my seedlings, and then a lot of times I'll find out somebody else who wants lettuce.
Yes.
Or before I even put the seed order together, I'll get together with some of my gardening friends and say, okay, I'd like to grow 6 kinds of lettuce this year. Why don't I buy one variety, you buy another variety, you buy another variety. So each of us ends up spending only maybe $2, $2.50 for one packet of lettuce seeds. And then we take our seeds out, plant our lettuce, and share the seeds. So now everyone has fresh seed. We don't have to store it for a year and worry about germination and viability going down. And we still save money because we've gotten together and shared the seed.
Yeah, it's called a seed swap. And there's actually a lot of different groups that you can find online that host seed swaps, either in person, which is really fun. It's a really social event. Or you'll mail them. I actually mail a lot of seeds, and I have a stack of envelopes and stamps just for mailing seeds. And I've made friends all over the country that way, just swapping seeds. And it's usually based online. You can check social media. You can check, there's some organizations, Seed Savers Exchanges. It's a really cool hobby to plug into.
It is a lot of fun, a really good way to make some really close friends because If you don't have anything else in common,
Yep.
if you're a gardener, you got that in common, and that's a
Oh,
good
yeah.
starting point for a long-lasting friendship
So true.
between all kinds of people. Now, one nice, quick little story here for you on storage and how long you can store seed. They found seed when some of the pyramids in Egypt were opened and explored, and they found that there was seed in there. And during that time, they thought that the people went into the afterlife and they would need food.
Those, yeah.
And so they were sending some seeds along with them so they could grow their own crops whenever they met their afterlife, and they could produce their own food. And they found these seeds in the pyramids, and these seeds have been stored for thousands of years. But they were in the pyramids, and that was a really dry environment. It may have not, they were in there, and they kind of stayed cool because they're protected from the sun. It was dark, but it was a super dry environment. And they found out these seeds were still viable. Thousands of years later, they could grow varieties that the Egyptians were growing in times back then.
That's super cool.
That had been stored in the pyramids. So that table we give you is a general rule, but don't be surprised if you find a packet of mom seeds that was buried in the fridge or in the freezer for 20 years, and you pull them out and you plant them, and lo and behold, they're still viable and doing great.
Yep.
So we hope you guys enjoyed this class. There are some labs to go along with it. A really nice one on doing a germination test.
Yep, that'll be fun and easy.
And all these pointers, as we mentioned, there are some sources you can get. If you work with really good seed companies and get their seed catalogs, I have to tell you, are a great source of information.
They are.
They will usually tell you exactly the conditions that are ideal for the seeds they're selling, for growing the seed, for germinating the seed, for planting the seed, when you want to plant it, the growing season, what zones they grow in. So take this to heart. What we've given you are some good ideas, some important points and things to consider whenever you're planting seed and saving seed and growing your garden. But there are other sources, and like I said, I really like seed catalogs.
Yeah, seed catalog's a great place to start, and just a quick Google search too. There's a world of information online, and seed saving is a hobby that a lot of people are very into. So there's information is out there, and somebody's willing to share it with you.